Welcome to the Design Next podcast series. I'm Daisy Crowder, Brand and Marketing Director at Craft. As a market-leading recruitment partner for ambitious design-led businesses, we have an eagle-eye view of the global creative industry. We've identified an issue around age and creative careers, with many people feeling unsure about how to manage, collaborate, and leverage the skills of a multi-generational design team. So for this series of our podcast, I'm interviewing design leaders across a range of ages to get their take on an aspect of diversity that will affect every single one of us. So, Aaron, thank you so much for being part of this chat. I really appreciate it. And you've spent so far about 13 years in the industry working with the world's most incredible brands and partners as well. So you've held positions such as design director at Apple and design director at Wieden & Kennedy as well. And you've achieved so much already. Like, I have to mention some of these awards. You've won an Emmy Award, multiple Cannes Gold Lions, D&AD Yellow Pencils, and you were named 7th in the Art Directors Club leaderboard for design in 2024. So first of all, congratulations.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
And now you've turned your attention and your skill set to co-founding Explorers Club in your role of creative director. So let's start by learning a little bit more about that. So why did you decide that age 33 was the best time to start your own studio?
Yeah, cool. So Explorers Club is a strategy and design studio founded by Io Fagbemi, really good friend of mine and longtime collaborator, and obviously myself. We're based between London and Los Angeles. Within our sort of first year of being a studio, we've partnered and worked with the likes of Atlantic Records, Doc Martens, and Idris Elba, as well as we've hosted and curated events at Barbican and London Design Festival. So I think we're super excited about our first year as Explorers Club. And in terms of why now, and mentioning I'm 34 now, but 33 when we started the studio. Not that I want to keep adding the years. I think it's something that I've personally always wanted to do. I think I knew that at the right time it would be something that I was going to do, and I don't think I put an age cap on it. It was just I kind of knew when I got there, when I had maybe enough experience to feel like I've kind of got a rounded opinion on everything, but I'm still young enough to have that kind of energy and that kind of ambition and that thirst for kind of success. And I think relationships are so important as well, probably the most important thing, between Io and myself. We've grown as friends over the years, but I think we've known for quite a few years that we were going to do something together. We talked about it in various levels of kind of, are we ready to go yet? And, and I think just, last year it was, it all kind of, the stars aligned and we were kind of ready to kind of kick things off. And just kind of on that idea of relationships as well. I think within our first year of Explorers Club, so many of our clients, such a huge majority of our clients has been previous clients from elsewhere, or they've been previous colleagues, people we've worked with side by side, and now they're kind of, we're kind of collaborating on more of a kind of client agency kind of side. So, I think as well as the experience as a creative, I think starting an agency with really great relationships and people in your kind of community and network is so important as well.
Totally. But I love what you said. Are we ready yet? It's such a fantastic notion for any founder to have. And some people just have that. And that obviously has been with you for a while. And I love to hear about that, because it means that you have that ambition and drive that you need to succeed, which you obviously have in the last year. But that feeling of are we ready yet? Is that something... Have you always felt like you're going to have a creative career? How long have you known that is your kind of career cause?
I was going right back to school. Creativity was really high on the agenda for me, whether that was art, design, music. I think from an early age it was kind of always there, and even seeing like small opportunities to like make money from it as a kid. Like I used to draw like band logos on people's like school books and stuff like that, and like, probably charging like a chocolate bar or something. But I guess it's a transaction of such, right? So yeah, so I think early on I kind of always knew, and it was like I think kind of then going into kind of like further education, I was actually like really torn between sport, art, and music.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
and it was funny. Going into that further education opportunity within the UK, I wasn't able to do all three of those things. I don't know if you remember this back in the time, but you were kind of forced into choosing into buckets, and
Yeah.
like, you can't have this because it clashes with the timeline, and that was incredibly frustrating for me at the time. Like, there was like three passions that I really had, and I wasn't able to follow them all and really discover deeper which one was going to be right for me for the rest of my life, which is crazy when you're like 15, 16, right? And you're like, yeah, you've got to choose which two to ditch now. Okay, I guess I'm dropping sport and music then. Like, like
Would you say that the education system that we had almost forced your hand a little bit to,
definitely. Yeah, definitely.
yeah,
So, I remember in the UK, obviously there's like A levels or like diplomas, and like if I wanted to do A levels in each of those, and there wasn't a college in Norfolk that allowed me to do all three of those. So I was like, well, if I'm gonna do one, I don't want to fill the other buckets with like geography and something that isn't personally for me. So I was like, I might as well do a diploma. And it was right up to the wire. I remember doing like music tech, like kind of like induction sessions, and was like, do I want to go into like recording and like that kind of thing? I was playing in bands at the time, and I think there's always a really interesting crossover of like music and art, and so many people I've met even further in my career, like having that kind of like background of playing in bands and stuff like that, and what
yeah.
that kind of means for how we approach creativity is really interesting. But yeah, I'd say my hand was kind of forced, really. It wasn't so much a toying cost. Like, I confidently lent into doing graphic design, but it was it was pretty much up to the wire of like where I was going to go as a mid teenager choosing the rest of my life.
Well, I mean, you obviously chose correctly. And we can't not mention the fact that we were in design tech lessons together.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah, yeah.
obviously I saw the brilliance early on.
Yeah,
So
no, this is like a full circle moment connecting with you like 20, 25 years later. I don't know how old, no, 20 years, not 25 yet.
let's say 20.
Let's say 20 years later, connecting again, having, went to high school together, and there's nobody from high school that I'm still in contact with, sadly. So, a lot's changed in that time. So it's great to reconnect and be talking together on
Yeah,
this.
totally. On age as well. So I mean, we're both so there's 6 months in it, but we're both millennials. I'm 33, you're 34, right? Just got to get
Yeah.
that in there.
Yeah.
And so we're here to talk about age. And I was wondering, have you ever felt too old or too young for the role that you were in at that time?
Yeah, it's a good question. I feel like there's kind of almost like two parts to this question. Or where my head kind of goes in kind of two directions. I think like the first half of the idea of being kind of like too young, perhaps. Like, I think in my 20s I had like so much energy and like crazy ambition. I was so ambitious and so driven, and yeah, like it almost kind of felt infinite, like what I could, let's say, push myself to kind of do and achieve. And I set myself like crazy goals, sometimes like intentionally impossible goals, knowing that I just had to keep kind of pushing and pushing and pushing. And I was my own worst critic. And yeah, I pushed myself so far. And I think, being totally honest with myself, I was really driven by a fear of failure, and what failure was, or what failure looked like, or what it meant to fail. And there's there's years of therapy sessions there as well in that topic. But you know, I think I don't know if I knew this at the time. I think at the time I was driven by like achievement and excellence. But I think looking back on it, I was probably driven more by a fear of failure. Which I think I'd kind of definitely kind of pushed on myself. And so yeah, I think that's kind of like, you know, that really pushed me in my young 20s. And, you know, I desperately wanted to get, you know, like I said, these kind of crazy goals. And I think one of them was like, you know, I was desperate to be like a creative director or a design director by the age of like 28.
Wow, that's plenty.
You know, so, you know, that was what I had really kind of pushed myself to do. And, you know, and I did it, admittedly only by like a couple of weeks of the last year of my 28th. But, you know, I did that. And whilst that was something that I like wanted more than anything, I was then obviously in like, you know, leadership meetings, big client meetings. And I had this kind of like, you know, I guess almost like imposter syndrome at the same time, which I think would probably surprise a lot of people. Like, I think like I had a good armor and like, I think that would surprise people. But like, yeah, I think like I was always battling this, like, I had this like constant battle of momentum and energy and this kind of like earned confidence along the way. But at the same time, I had this kind of like fear of failure and this like crippling imposter syndrome on the inside. And it's not something I'd speak about very often, but I'm you know, I'm more than happy to share it. But I think you know, I think that kind of dichotomy of those two things, of this like momentum and then this kind of imposter syndrome, when I was like, you know, still in the second half of my 20s, being in like quite big like kind of like leadership meetings, I always felt like the age put me at a disadvantage in that room, like straight away. Like people, I assumed that people would look at me and go like, why is this young kid here? And like, why is he in this room right now? And like, I'm sure nobody did think that. Maybe some people did, but like, I was the one putting that kind of like age kind of like factor on myself, I think.
Yeah, I really appreciate your honesty around that. And it's something that people, you know, some people are very honest about, it gets spoken about, but there's no real solution externally perhaps. But I don't know, is there anything you've learned along the way of what does give you confidence or what can help when you have those moments of imposter syndrome?
Yeah, in terms of like giving myself confidence, again, it's something I talked about in a lot of therapy sessions over the years. So something that I'm hopefully somewhat well versed on within my own kind of world. The big thing for me is momentum. You know, I think if I can kind of constantly achieve and raise the bar for myself, like time and time and time again, and like constantly just like keep that momentum going, that kind of manifests itself in a confidence, right? I think there's self-achievement and self kind of like reviewing of myself, and obviously there's like, I guess there's kind of like external validation of what makes something good. But yeah, I think that kind of this idea of like momentum is something that really kind of drives me forward. And I think like, you know, if you've got several like wins in a row, so to speak, and you get a knockback, it's like, okay, I can deal with this. I can handle this. Like, you know, I know what momentum feels like. Let's kind of step up and do it again. I think what's difficult, which I've also kind of seen, is like when you get constant knockbacks. And I think that's something that's kind of like really kind of difficult to deal with, you know, in terms of, you know, if you're constantly kind of getting like criticism and like, you know, or like briefs are not going to plan, for one reason or another, the project might die. Like, I think like when that happens like consecutively, I think that's then really difficult to kind of deal with. And then that really can affect your confidence.
You make it seem so effortless from everything that you've achieved. But also it's from some of the things that you said there about momentum and pushing yourself and the fact that you've had this almost limitless energy to achieve. Sounds like you're putting a lot of pressure on yourself, and it speaks to Something that we touched on when we spoke a couple of weeks ago about work ethic. You obviously have a relentless, limitless kind of work ethic, or that's what I can hear. But it's something that, you said before, perhaps has been lost a little bit in the industry. Do you see a difference in work ethic between people you've worked with who are much younger or much older than you?
Yeah, this idea of work ethic, I think it's really, really interesting. And like, I think, yeah, like I said, like in my early career, I almost had this feeling that like anything was possible. There was it was massively naive, but I think there was something like incredibly like healthy about that naivety, like not knowing any of the constraints, not knowing any of the like context, like just kind of like, yeah, just had this like energy to just like kind of go and go and go and go. And I think I was incredibly lucky in my first few jobs and roles where I really connected with like the leadership in those places, and those people have really helped shape my career as well. Like I had this energy that I had wanted to use and kind of achieve, but I feel like I was really supported by great leaders as well, where like, they really wanted to kind of help push those who really wanted it, and
Yeah.
I think it was just this like purely kind of like whatever you put in you can get out. And I think like that was kind of really special, and just like knowing that it wasn't that like you're working like crazy hard and not getting anything out, or it wasn't that you were kind of getting forced to work hard. It was never that. It was this kind of you know this just kind of unstoppable force that felt like we could kind of achieve stuff together. If it meant like working late, we did it. If it meant like pushing yourself to come up with one more route because you had a weaker one on the table, like you did it. If it meant doing extra personal projects outside of already a busy schedule, like we did
Yeah.
it. Like, personal projects really helped shape my kind of progression and the direction of my career. And I think, I really kind of like treasure those times and feel very lucky to be sort of, supported through those and like really helped with my kind of like energy and momentum. I think on this topic of kind of work ethic and where it is now, I think there's a flip side to it where like I think there's a lot of the industry that forces a work. I don't even want to say work ethic. It's just forces like an unhealthy, unsustainable level of expectation from people, like forcing people to kind of work late, work weekends, like, and it creates this like fear culture of like, I have to do this because I'm scared or out of fear because of like, the powers that be are kind of like making me kind of do this. And it also kind of like continues to manifest itself in like continued fear where you're like, I know I need to now do all of this because otherwise I'm going to kind of get told to. And I think there has now been a bit of a kind of collective kind of push against that in this, and I think it was probably aided by like COVID, working from home, where this kind of idea of finding a work-life balance is so much more important. And it's something that I've really dug into for a couple of years, quite intensely. I've suffered from complete burnout, medically diagnosed like major depression from being forced to overwork. So I've personally like firsthand been like a victim of this process, and something that I'm still recovering from, like emotionally and physically. But I think that like, so this idea of work-life balance is something that I've like really looked into, but I've kind of got to this point personally where I feel like it's such a kind of like binary idea of like work. Like it feels very binary. It feels very like, you can't have both or you can't integrate both. And I have a slight fear that the new generation coming through, whilst I wholeheartedly respect this idea of health within the industry, I can't stress that enough given my personal experiences. I think there's a kind of standoffishness, or there's kind of like a potential of seeing in the new generation that's just like does just enough. Whilst I like wholeheartedly respect this idea of like balance and health, I do think the industry, particularly in the younger generations, is losing this kind of like energy, this naive like energy of just like pushing and pushing and pushing because they can succeed as well. You know, they can achieve. Like I think, you know, I think that kind of maybe that kind of like drive is as a direct result of being forced to overwork. We're almost now so far the other end of the scale where people have lost that kind of passion and energy. And, you know, I think the creative industry should be full of passion. You know, that's why I got into it. You know, it should be an industry that's fun, that's creative, that's full of something you love. Like you want to get up every day and go to work and enjoy that we're creative problem solvers. You know, that ignites a passion in me personally. And I feel like, yeah, if I was to summarize this point, I feel like through the kind of like forcing of overworking over the years, it's actually kind of like put out or destroyed a potential passion in
Yeah.
someone's longer career. And I think that's really sad.
Yeah, I completely see what you mean about that because we've created a bit of a toxic, I think it's fair to say, generation of
Yeah.
work that is
Yeah.
getting better, but it's forced people to be really fiercely independent and in control of their own work-life balance, or how have you? I mean, you said career health last time we spoke. I love that term. More in control of their career health, and so that fierce independence has translated into being a bit less collaborative, but perhaps a bit less involved in the industry. And that's something we need to fight back for, I feel, because we do need to invite people back into back into the creative industries. In the UK, GCSE enrolment of design courses has dropped 67% in the last 10 years. And you can see why. It's not seen as viable. It's not seen as a very inviting industry. So there is work definitely to be done there. I think it's a really fantastic point. So what advice would you give somebody looking to enter the design industry today?
Advice wise, I'd say there's probably like two beats to this for me. One is kind of like skill wise, and one is maybe more behaviorally, and like more of an attitude. I think skill wise, I think like just keep learning, like just never stop learning. Like I think like I don't know, I feel like I kind of like came out of like university and was just like, cool, this is my career now. And like, you know, I kind of made it like to this point. And I think like, I think just keep learning, like look at the speed of like the way technology is kind of developing, like, you know, embrace every new tool that kind of comes our way, or even better, like go looking for new tools, right? You know, I think I kind of feel like at uni I was told to focus on one area of the industry and become like an expert at it. It makes you kind of more employable. It's hard to say whether like a decade and a half ago that was true. Keep learning, pick up every tool there is, like, you know, AI, we haven't mentioned that yet. Like that's not going to go away like anytime soon, if at all. And, you know, the speed that's developing is crazy. And I use AI like all day, every day. It makes my day faster. It makes it more efficient. I really feel lucky to have kind of gone through a decent stage of my education and career with a lot less of these tools, that basically, I guess my tool being my brain, right? You know, and I think that's really important. Like I feel very lucky to be in this kind of generation where, you know, we kind of pre and post all of this like technological advancement, where you kind of got context of both sides. Like sometimes there's a stubbornness with like the older generations to technology, which, you know, I accept. And then, you know, will the younger generation find like have all these tools so easy that they kind of forget to think for themselves? So I think that's kind of really, really interesting. I think my second point is something that I kind of always say in at Explorers Club, we still say to ourselves on a day-to-day basis, is just this idea of lessening the ego. You know, take your ego out of the situation. I read so many books in the last year about ego being the enemy and things like that, because like I think when your ego gets in the way, it clouds your judgment, your decisions become illogical, emotional, obviously, instead of illogical. And I think like lessen your ego and just never stop learning, be that skill wise, like I said, or whether that be kind of like more about like, your behaviors to how like who you are in the room or how you approach conversations. And I think I don't know if someone ever told me that. I think it's just something that I kind of like learned along the way. I think probably something I have really discussed a lot. And just, yeah, I think this idea of like lessening the ego is so important, I think, to your kind of like long-standing growth.
So you spoke a little bit, you hinted at some of the strengths and perhaps areas watch out for different generations there, for younger people to have this wonderful naivety that allows you to keep learning, and obviously being digital natives is a super helpful thing at the moment, through to people, older creatives who are perhaps a little bit stubborn and not quite as tech savvy. I think that's an assumption we can draw. Is there a peak age for working in design right now in your eyes?
I think again, like I'm not trying to intentionally answer every question with two answers, but I feel like I feel like it really depends on the role within the design industry. I think if as soon as you say design industry, I think my gut anyway, I'm sure lots of people's would be to be like a designer, like a maker, a doer. And I think if you are that, you're the one hands on, you're the one like coming up with the ideas, being aware of like current trends, tastes, like what the audience understands, and you're just an absolute killer at making stuff and your craft is excellent. I think like, that's your late 20s, your early 30s. I think that's the stage you're kind of at. And I think that's, this stage where you're probably, the most desirable, the most sought after, the most employable as well. Like at that age, you're just on it. But I think if we start to then think about like the role of maybe like a leader, I think that's really hard to put an age stamp on, almost impossible. I'm not trying to like cop out on that answer, but I think that's a mentality thing. And I think that's great. I think that's so positive. Like I mentioned earlier about like, maybe choosing sport when I was a teenager, but like, you look at captains of sports teams, I think they used to always be like the eldest and the most experienced, but I don't think they are now. It's like, what leader traits like, do you have? And I think like, if you're someone that really wants to make a real difference, you care about growing brands and people's careers, even people's like lives, really, if you're talking about the integration of work and life, like if you're someone that really kind of cares about that, and you're investing enough in yourself to develop those skills, because I don't think it comes naturally. I think if you're investing enough in your skills to be able to develop other people's careers and something that you really care about and you want to champion, I don't know if there's a peak age for that. I think that's something that's incredibly kind of, movable depending on who you are.
That fresh approach to leadership, it's not number of years served, but the quality you can bring to a team. I think that's a thing we should all remember. It's very easy to work your way up a very obvious career ladder in design or in different roles within an agency or a creative team. And it's easy to forget those real core principles that make a fantastic leader. I wanted to talk to you about last year, Explorers Club released a book called Play is the Highest Form of Research, which I love, and it looks super fun as a piece. But play is inherently a youthful trait. So how do you encourage people to use that and embrace it for their own practice?
Yeah, no, thanks for asking about the book. Yeah, it was really important project for us. Like I think, we'll definitely do more of these where we want to, raise topics into the industry that we really kind of care about, and play something that was super close to us. I think, we just always loved that kind of like childlike curiosity that can be a catalyst for different shaped creativity. And I've talked already in this session about like this sort of like the naivety you have as a younger designer, but if you kind of which is a really positive thing and creates this like amazing like infinite energy, but taking that really far back into your kind of like childhood is it's where the like purest form of play and kind of creativity came from. Like you make different things. I remember like getting a Lego set. I'd always build the like underworld scene thing as per the manual first, and then I'd like take it apart and build something that was totally like not on the menu, and just and I think that kind of like discovery was so pure. And I think something that we really found from this book as well, because we spoke to like so many people from brands, creatives, designers, writers, people from like art galleries. So we spoke to so many amazing people within the industry to form the content of the book. And I think something that I really loved that came out of it was, again, this idea of like fearlessness. Like if you're a kid, you don't have any fear. You like nothing
Yeah.
can go wrong. And I feel like we've potentially lost a bit of that in the industry, maybe because so much fear is forced upon us. That fearlessness can't be present. And I think like just this idea of play just really harnesses this idea of fearlessness and bravery within creativity. And I feel like it's something that we'd really love to kind of really continue to push forward at Explorers Club.
I love that. I just want to play with Lego now. It's such a wonderful thing. It just like takes you to a place of mindfulness. And like you say, play is so good for us. It's literally enhances our health. So I think that's a wonderful thing to bring back into the industry, and a wonderful piece of, I guess, advice for us all to try that a little bit more. Have you had any advice from somebody of a different generation that you've really brought forwards and used in your career?
Yeah, definitely. There's always one that kind of comes to mind. I know your question was a different generation. This person's only 5 years older than me, I think, so not quite a different generation. But yeah, Craig Oldham, who was one of my first kind of mentors, when I sort of, told that story earlier of like, really being supported by leaders in the early part of my kind of story. He was one of those people, and we're now long-term friends as well, and speak as regularly as we can, and stay in touch. But someone I've always kind of looked up to as a creative and a person. But he said to me really early on, I don't know if he knows he said this, but he said, be interested, not interesting. I'm not sure it's even particularly his quote, but he relayed it to me. And that is so true today. Like, it's something that I just think about so often. And I think like, it just continues to kind of get a deeper meaning throughout my kind of career. I've talked earlier about lessening the ego and just constantly kind of like learning and, working with people in a way that you listen, you respect, you absorb, you help, and just keep learning from those around you, and just keep listening. And I think that like that just makes you a better creative, a better person.
You've hit us through a few notes that really speak to me there, because our series of design events is called Common Interest, because of that same sort of borrowed quote around being interested. And I'm emailing Craig at the moment actually about speaking at our next All Agency Day. So it's a wonderful full circle moment. Thank you. To finish, I wanted to ask, how would you want people to describe you as a creative in 25 years?
Wow, in 25 years.
Yeah, let's go well into the future. You are 59.
Retired and on a beach.
Mate, same. Your legacy, though, let's imagine you've had your feet up for a while.
Yeah. Okay, let me take 10 seconds.
Yeah, I threw that on you.
Obviously you've thrown the word like legacy in there. Like obviously that's a huge word. And how do you earn a legacy? How do you create a legacy? I think for me it would be about operating at the highest level as an individual creative and continuously doing that. But very much hand in hand, paving the way for others to do that with you. I think I have this infinite ambition that I've had throughout the younger parts of my career, which still burns in me now. And I think it will continue to in different shapes as a business owner and a creative studio founder. But it's so important for me that I help others do the same.
Thank you so much for your honesty and transparency and insight that you've shared. I can't promise the infinite energy, but I can try and be more curious and naive as a result of this chat.
I love being involved in stuff like this and kind of, opening the conversation up.
Awesome. Super valuable. Thank you so much.
No, I've enjoyed it loads.
Design Next is a project bigger than this podcast alone. We've conducted our own research on how to best manage your own career at every life stage and how to leverage a generationally diverse creative team. Find out how we can build your career and your studio on our website.